Superman is one of those heroes that will absolutely outlive us all. This guy, believe it or not, is actually a descendant of Kal-El. This weird little dude hails from far in the future, around the 67th century to be more specific, but he is immortal, so he's also encountered as far into the future as the 853rd century. He is also known to be a fifth dimensional being, which means that he can explore dimensions beyond the understanding of any normal humans, including myself. I don't get it. And I'm not alone, most heroes wouldn't even understand it either. He has all the classic Kryptonian powers, but due to his bloodline including genes from a whole other race of superpowered beings, this future version of Superman also has 5D vision, which means that he can share his thoughts with others in real time, among other things. And he uses a weapon called the Hyperpoon, which is a hilarious name for a weapon that functions beyond the means of our comprehension. It's basically just more 5D stuff. At number 9 is Super Batman. Not much is known about this guy other than that he was at one point part of the Superman squad. He is known as a mixture of two different heroic traditions, having descended from both the Superman and Batman families. Of course, he wears a uniform that marries the designs of both Batman and Superman costumes, and seems to have a combination of the two heroes' strengths as well. Sometime in the future this guy is formed, and even though there's little known about him, I put him on the list because a hybrid of Superman and Batman must be pretty powerful to some crazy degree we would never understand. At number 8 is Superman Secundus. In the DC 1 million timeline, Superman Secundus is explained to be Superman Prime's direct heir, having founded the Superman dynasty and successfully fighting off the Tyrant's son, as well as Solaris, among others. Then in All-Star Superman, another future Superman named Superman 2 appears, who seems to just be the same version of the hero as Superman Secundus, just in a different iteration. This future stuff gets a little bit complicated, but this future Superman seems pretty powerful, and since he's known to be the son of Superman Prime, I felt I just needed to throw him on the list. At number 7, we've got Jon Kent, or FKA Superboy. This future version of Superman is pretty unique in that he's actually a clone of both Superman and Lex Luthor. He spends his youth in fear that he'll turn out more like Lex Luthor in all the worst ways, and unfortunately that's actually what happens. As Connor grows up into a more mature hero, he gains a reputation as a brutal version of Superman who uses extreme force against his enemies with little to no remorse. But later on during the Infinite Crisis storyline, we learn that this future Jon Kent is actually a clone of an early version of himself, which is a relief to him, but doesn't make much sense. Does it make sense? I don't know. Anyway, he's not Lex Luthor, at least. At number 6, we have Adam Ken plus 477 SPMN. The future is horrible at coming up with names apparently, but anyway, this future version of Superman is pretty cool because he kind of comes across as so futuristic that he's actually a much more complex being, but also a sort of simpler and stripped down being than Superman is now in a weird way, which is how it seems like the future would actually be if you went forward far enough. In Superman number 400, we see a future where Superman has died and his descendants have reproduced with humans, creating a new type of super being. But when they accidentally create a massive vortex in space, one of their leaders, Adam Ken, elects himself to plug it while the rest of them turn themselves into energy for some reason, to protect themselves. Anyway, the plan works, and the vortex is mended, leaving only Adam Kent, we'll just call him Adam, leaving Adam as the only living being in the universe. So he thinks, until he meets his Eve. At number 5, we have the DCAU Superman from Batman Beyond. Only aging slightly, leaving some gray in his hair, this version of Kal-El is actually turned evil by Starro the Conqueror, who influences his actions over time to fit his evil agenda. But before this is found out, Superman leads the Justice League Unlimited for a while into the future, even inviting Terry McGinnis, aka Batman Beyond, into the League. It's good he does this too, because Batman becomes the one who frees Superman from Starro's grasp down the line. This version of Superman is a more experienced and stronger hero, and although he's tricked by a villain into doing some evil deeds, this isn't a list ranking power or wit. This version of Superman is just one of the more well-known and respected, and I figured he at least had to go in the top 5. At number 4 is Jordan Elliot. This is one of my personal favorites of these future versions of Superman because it's a rare example of a future Kal-El hanging up the mantle of Superman and actually living the existence of a mortal man, which I think is a pretty cool glimpse into the character and how he would act if his life were simple and much less influential. His motivation to do this is that he actually ends up killing Mr. Mxyzptlk, which, thank goodness, so I don't have to say the guy's name anymore. Who he kills after the annoying little dude lays out a number of bad things to happen in Superman's life. In a fit of shame, Superman voluntarily walks into a room containing gold kryptonite, which strips him of his powers permanently. He then takes on the name of Jordan Elliot after his father Jor-El and marries Lois Lane in anonymity. And honestly, I'm happy for the dude because we don't have to deal with that little Mxyzptlk guy anymore, right? And also, Superman's done enough. At number 3 is the Superman from the Dark Knight Returns storyline. One of the most iconic storylines involving both Superman and Batman takes place in a future where the government, aka Lex Luthor and Brainiac, has control over him, and they force Superman to carry out missions for them as a kind of superpowered contractor. A brainwashed superpowered contractor, that is. Seeing this from afar, Bruce Wayne decides he has to venture into the dangerous territory of mortal versus alien combat, taking on Superman 1v1. Luckily, Clark Kent comes back from his brainwashing, but only after a huge battle between the two former friends. At number 2 is the Superman from the Kingdom Come storyline. This iconic future version of Superman has to come out of retirement to protect the human race against a new, misguided group of younger super beings. A more grizzled, aged, and wise Superman, the Kingdom Come storyline brings a ton of humanity to the character as he faces the challenge of humbling himself and his allies in their older age. After a murderous superhero named Magog is acquitted of killing the Joker, Superman goes into hiding for 10 years, leaving Kansas to be overrun by a community of misguided superpowered beings. Having also lost Lois Lane, Superman becomes jaded, but ultimately comes out of hiding to reform the Justice League. On top of reforming a younger generation of misguided heroes though, and well, a brainwashed Captain Marvel, which adds a huge rut in the whole works, they have to also prevent the humans from dropping 3 massive nuclear bombs on Kansas, which are also superpowered to affect superpowered beings more than they originally would. This version of Superman shows a side to the hero that we are not used to, giving him a wiser, more jaded disposition. It really proves that doing the right thing is just in Kal-El's blood, no matter how much the world has betrayed him. At number 1 is Superman Prime. This has got to be the most powerful and iconic futuristic version of Superman from the comics, and don't get this mixed up with Superboy Prime either, that's a whole other guy. Superman Prime appears in the DC 1 Million series and sets out at the end of the 21st century to explore the cosmos. He then returns briefly in the 700th century, that's roughly 70,000 years later, and spends his time in his new Fortress of Solitude, which is the sun. Finally, another 10,500 years later in the 853rd century, he comes back again, this time with a totally golden makeover, and creates a new Lois Lane from scratch along with some other key players from his old life. This version of Superman is just completely overpowered and more of a god than many other iterations of the hero, giving us a glimpse into the vast expanse and possibility of a distant future for Superman. At number 10, we have Superboy from Superboy Annual 1996. In a distant future, the Superboy mantle is taken up by a being named Quetzel, who comes from the planet Aztlan. And instead of the classic origin story, this future world gives the title of Superman to those selected as champions by the god Quetzalcoatl, which is basically a giant flying snake that seems to be based on an ancient religious text from Aztec culture, but that's just how Superman gets his name. Superboy is the apprentice to that champion known as Superman in this storyline. He's pretty short-lived, naturally only lasting the 1 annual issue, but he's got a cool new costume design and has a different cultural background than the Superboy we're used to, which is interesting to see. At number 9, we have Superman from Superman Man of Steel Annual 1996. Side note, in case you didn't already know, there was a crossover spanning through all of the DC annuals in 1996 called Legends of Dead Earth, which framed DC stories in a dystopian future. So it was a good year for a list like this. Regardless, in this future, a future version of Lex Luthor is leader of the Galactic Empire and is systematically destroying all planets that show potential to foster the birth of new Supermen. But as he's preparing to destroy a planet called Hydros, a rebel force sneaks onto the planet and saves its only remaining survivor, Caleb. Once he leaves the planet, he's able to absorb the radiation from a nearby star and becomes the new Superman of that time. At number 8, we have All-Star Superman. Now, this Superman is part of a completely different continuation of that which comic book fans have been following. Known to generally take place around the pre-crisis continuity, this alternate continuation goes on into a distant future during the course of the 12-issue maxi series. And it follows the adventure of a Superman who is facing death at the hands of Lex Luthor, who gives him a fatal dose of solar radiation. And with his remaining time in existence, he decides to carry out a number of tasks, including creating Earth Q, which refers to the real timeline that we're used to, and repairing the sun as well, which he does by flying right into it, sacrificing himself in the process. This version of the hero is back to basics. He comes off as very simple and relaxed in his demeanor, without the burdens of past traumatic adventures from the current timeline. At number 7 is the Superman from Last Night on Earth. In this Elseworld future, the world is in a very dark place as a result of global warming, and Lex Luthor and Superman are debating over good and evil, with a very brutal consequence on the line for the losing party: getting impaled by kryptonite. And the judges who choose the winner? All of humanity, of course. And although it appears that Superman has won the debate by the end, humanity chooses to impale Superman instead of Lex Luthor, leaving him, well, dead. The following events take place as a result of his death and is largely considered more of a Batman storyline, but for a time there we catch a glimpse of yet another futuristic version of Superman, one who chooses to use his words over his fists, I guess. At number 6, we have Mon-El, aka Lar Grand, from the Legion of Superheroes. This guy is sort of veering towards being a knockoff version of Superman, since he's known to be a superhero inspired by Superboy, who is himself already a copy of Superman in a way. Either way, this futuristic version of the hero is actually vulnerable to lead instead of kryptonite, and is sent to the Phantom Zone by Superboy when he's fatally poisoned. A lot of Superman being poisoned in this list, I'm realizing. Future's not so bright. Either way, he's put into the Phantom Zone for his own protection, but when a 30th century version of Brainiac, Brainiac 5, finds a cure to his poisoning, Mon-El returns and becomes a member of the Legion of Superheroes, and actually takes Superboy's place in his future timeline. At number 5, we have Superman from the House of El Future State storyline. This version of the hero has the exact same backstory that we're used to, being the last son of Krypton, all that jazz. But in this continuation, Superman is captured and has his powers stripped after being stabbed with kryptonite. He's then trapped by Mongol in one of his war worlds and forced to fight in a gladiatorial arena. Every time he dies, Mongol brings him back to life and forces him to fight again. Meanwhile, in the 30th century, a group of Superman's descendants create a new version of the House of El and rule over the cosmos, believing Superman has always been nothing but a myth. It's sort of a sad story in reality, but don't worry, Superman does make a comeback in the end after his time as a gladiator. At number 4, we have the Superman from Superman vs. Terminator. This one is pretty self-explanatory, and it's not considered to be an official part of the DC canon, as you can imagine. But it's still one of the cooler iterations of Superman, all things considered. Created by Alan Grant and Steve Pugh over at Dark Horse Comics, Superman vs. the Terminator, Death to the Future, is just a fun read. When Skynet sends Terminators to find a young man named Connor in Metropolis, they're met with resistance they don't quite expect, when none other than Superman shows up. The art style and storytelling matches up pretty darn well with the DC Comics if you ask me, and I just felt like this version of the hero needed some love due to how unique his circumstances are. At number 3, we have 6th Dimension Superman. Living in what appears to be a more advanced future, we're introduced to an older Justice League that's initially thought to be the Prime Earth Justice League, which seems plausible at first due to the way that they're dressed among a few other things, but eventually we realize that it's just a futuristic version of the current Justice League. And with the team still being led by Superman, we assume that they've been continuing on with their typical crime-fighting business, but there's another twist that's soon revealed, which is that Superman is actually World Forger masquerading as the Kryptonian. The real future Superman's whereabouts are unknown at the time, but World Forger looks and acts just like the real Superman, so I felt that he belonged on the list. Okay, fine, I mainly included him because of his cool costume design, but even in his short 10-issue run during Justice League Volume 4, he appears to be about as powerful as an aging, more wise, and practiced Superman might be. At number 2, we have Justice Lord Superman from Justice League Beyond. In this alternate future, Lex Luthor is President of the United States, and Superman is, at first, pretty much the same as the one we know. But when President Luthor executes the Flash, Superman storms the White House and confronts him. But after Luthor delivers this manipulative speech saying Superman has helped him become evil and is a big important counterpart to all his evil deeds, Superman is pushed over the edge and executes the president. This comes as a shock to Superman's allies, but it sets a new precedent for this futuristic team known as the Justice Lords. And moving forward, Justice Lord Superman continues to deal with criminals by lobotomizing them with his laser vision. This storyline actually feels like a combination between Injustice and The Dark Knight Rises, in that there's a morally questionable team being led by a twisted version of Superman, and then Batman decides he needs to stand up against Superman's destructive ways, except in this case, it all happens sometime in the distant future, fitting it nicely at the top of this list. At number 1, we have Jon Kent from Future State. This is a fun one. A younger version of the hero who is the offspring of Superman and Lois Lane. The Future State event was released in 2021 and looked at what a potential future for the DC universe would and could look like. And alongside a handful of other new characters taking on the mantles of notable DC heroes, Jon Kent takes on the Superman mantle. There isn't much known about him quite yet, but at first glance he appears to have a more personal disposition. Possibly his half-human heritage gives him a bit more of an approachable energy, almost like Invincible. I'm looking forward to seeing how far Jon Kent goes in the comics and how they will develop a canonized story of how he ends up taking over for his father in the long run.
First and foremost, we need to bring up Composite Superman. This was an everyday man who gained the ability to shapeshift and look exactly like Superman and Batman. Joseph Meach was actually a diver who had organized an elaborate stunt to jump off a high building into a large tank of water. What he didn't realize, however, was that the tank was leaking and only an inch of water remained. Superman managed to intervene and save him from hitting the tank, and he even gave him a job as a custodian at the Superman Museum. Now, this seemed like a pretty noble gesture from the Man of Steel, but Meach only grew bitter having to stare at all of Superman's achievements every single day. But one night when he was wiping down a case of Legionnaire miniatures, a bolt of lightning traveled through an open window and struck Meach and the statues, granting the diver all the powers of every member of the Justice League. He decided to create a costume that was half Superman and half Batman and aimed to take down the superheroes. As it turns out though, Meach's powers were only temporary and he was unable to accomplish his final goal. Now here's what Superman would have looked like if his ship had crashed in the Soviet Union. As we know, Superman happened to land in the United States and spent a large chunk of his time in America, but Red Sun looks at how the superhero would have turned out in the era of communist Russia. The Soviets unveiled Red Sun's Superman to the world in 1953, and this obviously sent the US into a bit of a panic. This forced them to shift their focus from nuclear weapons to metahumans at the peak of the Cold War. The 3-part miniseries details how this Superman was immortal, but that he was actually a direct descendant of Lex Luthor and Lois Lane. To make matters even more interesting, Red Sun Superman is also from Earth's distant future, which adds a whole new level of complexity to this alternate hero. And although Red Sun looks nearly identical to the standard Superman, you will obviously notice that he has the communist hammer and sickle on his chest instead of the trademark Superman logo. There was even a younger version of Red Sun who resided on Earth-30 and was recruited by Monarch to fight his his war against the Monitors. Next on our list is Super Doom. Now, with a name like that, you should already be able to tell this alternate version of Superman was not a good one. Super Doom came to fruition thanks to a machine that was created by Jimmy Olsen, which turned thoughts into reality. This led to the creation of a robot Superman, which was sold to Overcorp, who later turned it into Super Doom. Now, you would think that a robot version of this great hero could be used to stop all sorts of crimes, but that is not what Overcorp wanted to do. Instead, they decided to take over Earth-45, but they also wanted to go one step further and enter the bleed space. Super Doom was essentially sent on a mission to find the creators of the Multiverse as it destroyed planets and other versions of Superman in the process. It seemed like this monstrous creation could not be stopped, but that was until it reached Earth-23's Superman. This Superman, along with Lex Luthor, thankfully managed to strand it between universes and put a stop to Super Doom's mad rampage. Up next is Superman's exact opposite, otherwise known as Bizarro Superman. This strange iteration of Superman would say things like "me will hurt you" instead of "I will save you." Aside from doing things very differently from your traditional Superman, Bizarro also has a very strange looking appearance. He has chalk white skin and messy hair and just doesn't seem as well put together as someone like Clark Kent. Bizarro has also worn a few different costumes over the years, but his most memorable one included a reverse S symbol, a clear indication of his opposite personality. While many people view this as just a funny anti-hero to Superman, others believed it was a bit of political propaganda from DC. Since Superman was also so popular in the United States during the Cold War, many believe that DC had actually created Bizarro to represent the conflicting opinions of the Soviet Union. After that, we have the Justice Lord. This is a very dark side of Superman that the world really shouldn't see. This one was presented as an alternate timeline in a 2003 episode of the Justice League that was ironically titled A Better World. In this episode, Kal-El and the rest of the Justice Lords stormed the White House after Lex Luthor had just eliminated the Flash. It was quite obvious why the Lords were not too happy with President Luthor, but this Superman did not handle things in traditional Superman fashion. As Wonder Woman and Batman were busy fighting off the Secret Service, Lex Luthor is threatening Superman with a big button that can single-handedly start a nuclear war. Well, Superman decides to take things to the next level, and as his eyes glow red, Lex Luthor was brought down to a pile of dust. Batman and Wonder Woman come rushing into the Oval Office to investigate, but it was clear that they were far too late. This allowed a very dark side of Superman and the rest of the Justice Lords to take control of the Earth. Next on our list is Ultraman. This one is sort of like Bizarro's Superman in a sense, but far more powerful and much more dangerous. Ultraman is a very evil version of Superman who is hell-bent on destruction. Aside from being a criminal and an outright maniac, the other thing that makes Ultraman Superman's real opposite is his love of kryptonite. Ultraman actually thrives off of the substance that Superman cannot stand, and this only adds to his growing powers. Ultraman will also gain even more power the angrier he gets, which makes him one truly terrifying anti-hero. Ultraman's Justice League is also just a rowdy crime syndicate that has no desire to help anyone but themselves. It appropriately features a U-shaped logo instead of an S, and they're exactly what the citizens of Earth-3 do not need. There have been a lot of interesting takes on opposite heroes over the years, but this crystal-eating maniac is just downright terrifying. Up next is Gold Superman. Yes, this sounds like an ultra version of a character in a video game, but Gold Superman is very real. This Superman resides on Earth-44, where he is actually a member of the superhero group known as the Metal Men. These are robotic versions of all your favorite Justice League heroes, including Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Arrow, and many more. But with all of the tech involved with these robotic superheroes, you just knew that there was always a disaster waiting to happen. Back in Final Crisis 7, the Metal Men's base of operations separated from Earth-44 and collided with New Earth. But instead of sustaining just some minor injuries, the magnetic fields on New Earth actually caused the robotic heroes to go haywire and go on a destructive rampage. Their wild outburst was labeled as technocide, and Gold Superman and his fellow heroes destroyed all of their memorabilia in the trophy room. Lex Luthor and Dr. Sivana finally managed to shut them down and put an end to the Metal Men for good. Next up, we have Prime Superman. This alternate version of Clark Kent appeared in the 12-issue All-Star Superman, where he was tasked with repairing the sun. Prime Superman was actually overexposed to solar radiation in this series, which was completely destroying his own cells. It turns out that this overexposure was orchestrated by Lex Luthor, but Superman did end up getting his final revenge. Clark managed to make it last long enough to eliminate Luthor with a gravity weapon, but he also embarked on a journey that was known as the 12 Super Challenges. This included helping the scientist Leo Quintum, as well as revealing his true identity to Lois Lane. Superman managed to complete his challenges before setting off into of the sun to build it an artificial heart. Now, many people just assume that Superman had passed on, but it turns out that he was actually living as a construct within the sun. He also managed to leave his genetic code behind, so Quintum could create the second Superman, the true genetic son of Clark and Lois. Next on our list is Kal the Super Martian. If you ever wanted to picture Superman as a more traditional extraterrestrial, this is what you would end up getting. A very green version of the Man of Steel who lives on Earth-32. This is basically the equivalent of a fusion between your standard Superman as well as the Martian Manhunter. Super Martian is a leading member of the Justice Titans, and he's one of the main heroes who was captured by Prophecy in an attempt to steal their powers. Thankfully, this plan was thwarted by the Justice Incarnate, but the Super Martian has definitely had a wild ride. This strange version of Superman worked hand in hand with Batman, who managed to fight off Apex Lex. Super Martian and Batman were able to communicate via telepathy, and this obviously came in handy when it came to defending Earth-32 from its variation of Lex Luthor. And finally we have Calvin Ellis. Although this name might sound new to some of you, he's technically already been mentioned on this list. As it turned out, Calvin Ellis was the secret identity of Earth-23 Superman, who managed to put an end to Super Doom's run of planetary destruction. Calvin Ellis was introduced in Final Crisis 7 and is actually based off of US President Barack Obama. DC created this version of Superman before Obama was elected as the president in real life, so you could technically say that DC actually predicted the future. Earth-23 also happens to be a universe where African American superheroes have risen to prominent positions of power and play a pivotal role on the planet's everyday life. Ellis also played a major role in forming the Justice Incarnate, who just happened to be the special team who rescued many captured heroes from Prophecy. Ellis and his group also fought against many other multiversal threats and proved that this version of Superman is perhaps one of the strongest we've ever seen.
Number 10. Dark Multiverse Superman. Now, I don't know if this is laziness, but the Dark Universe version of Superman doesn't really get much justification as to why his mind snapped and he killed millions of people, his own family, and most of the other superheroes. The Batman of this universe, after seeing this Superman kill his own wife, and after he cuts off Batman's arm, decides that this guy just ain't it. And he transformed himself into a doomsday Batman hybrid called the Devastator, and smashed down this Superman, poisoned him, and impaled him on spikes. A quick evil Superman story, but it was in service of an amazing Batman story. Number 9. Lex Luthor Superman. Okay, this evil Superman isn't technically Superman, but when Superman and Doomsday are both killed by each other, Earth Prime's Lex Luthor returns to Earth after getting bored of being the new Darkseid on Apokolips, and learns of Superman's demise. Lex Luthor, with the help of his superpowered armor, steps in and makes himself the new Superman. I mean, not really Lex, but sure, we'll just give this one to you. Now, he had some good intentions, but it's Lex Luthor. He wasn't exactly the best person for the job. After having multiple falling outs with the new real Superman, pre-Flashpoint Clark Kent, he gave up the title of Superman and started acting as an independent hero, and sometimes a villain. Number 8. Parallax Superman. In this story, Parallax, the physical embodiment of fear, took over the body of Kal-El, making him submit to Laxi by torturing children, and uses this Kryptonian's powers to confront Sinestro, who traps the cocky super entity and teleports him to the caves of Quard, where Sinestro tries to take Parallax out of Superman's body for his own evil plans. But surprise! Parallax has already escaped Superman's body, and a battle ensues between Sinestro and Parallax, leading to the surface of Quard. Superman escapes from the caves and in a last-ditch attempt to defeat the entity, steals Sinestro's power ring and coerces Parallax to swallow his super butt whole. Superman is a clever guy though. He traps Parallax inside the power ring and the day is saved. Gosh, a lot of plot twists there. Number 7. Hank Henshaw. Hanky Boy here was already a villain of Superman's from past stories, but when Superman was killed by Doomsday, Hank, unable to directly get revenge against Superman himself, decided to attack his reputation instead. Come on, man. He's already dead. Not cool, dude. Not cool. After creating a Kryptonian cyborg body using the birthing matrix, he took on the guise of Supes and went about destroying Superman's memorial plaque. Then he saved the president to get clout so the president would recognize him as the real Superman. Eventually, he and Mongol destroyed Coast City, and the real reborn Superman, with the help of others, defeated and discredited him. At least he looked really cool. Number 6. Overman. Now this version of our favorite red and blue man didn't end up in Kansas when he was ejected from Krypton. No. This Kal-El found himself in Sudetenland, Germany in 1938 and was acquired by a certain mustached fascist. With Kal and Kryptonian tech, the Reich were obviously able to win World War II and rule over the entire planet. Later, Overman would become disgusted with the stashed man when the Holocaust had been finalized, although he still served the state. It's kind of a weird set of morals there, dude. Eventually, he was cloned and received a love in the form of Overgirl, but after her death, he was completely heartbroken, and he supplied information to the freedom fighters who long opposed the fascists, which eventually led to the death of the new Reichman, the Justice League, and the city of Metropolis. With the grief of all these losses holding him down, he was overthrown by his friend. Damn. Kinda hard to feel bad for him though. Number 5. Injustice Superman. The Superman of the Injustice universe has pretty much the same history as the baseline Superman, but when the Joker kidnaps the pregnant Lois Lane, it lures Superman into a trap of fear gas. In his poisoned state, Superman hallucinates his true love as the villain Doomsday and instantly attacks, flying Lois and his unborn child into space, killing them, and inadvertently causing a nuclear bomb to destroy his city, Metropolis. After suddenly losing his city, wife, and baby, Superman goes into an honestly understandable rage, bursting into the interrogation room where Batman is learning the true intentions of the Joker and plunges his super fist right through the guy's chest. Following these events, Superman takes control of the Earth and rules it as a tyrant. Fortunately, Batman forms an insurgency to try and beat this corrupted Superman, eventually enlisting the aid of another Earth's Justice League, and I guess technically whoever plays the tied-in video game, to defeat him and save the day. Number 4. Brutal. Brutal is a cloned version of Superman, but unlike a certain bizarre version of Superman, who we will talk about later, don't worry, this duplication was done by none other than Darkseid himself. He raised the resulting clone into a soldier, nay, a weapon, and unleashed him on the superheroes of Earth-2, along with Steppenwolf and the other Hunger Dogs, but they don't really matter. When Steppenwolf tried to subvert his master Darkseid and take Earth as his own, brutally murders him with his heat vision, establishing his devotion to his lord Darkseid. Let me make my intentions clear. Hail Darkseid! Which is just a sweet line after you murdered a general of Darkseid. The Earth became lost to Darkseid's minions, and eventually, after a lot of other stuff, Kal-Zod, Earth-2 Superman, faced Brutal in combat, and after a furious battle, showed that Brutal was just an imitation, and a cheap one at that, as his body began to deteriorate, and the day was saved. Again. Hey guys, just wanted to say a quick thanks for watching. We hope you're enjoying the video. If you are, why not head on over to that pretty little subscribe button and give us a follow and a like. You guys are the reason we can even be here in the first place. Love you! Okay, on to the top 3. Number 3. Super Doom. On Earth-45, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Clark Kent are scientists instead of reporters, and they use their smarts to build a machine that can turn thoughts into reality, which, I mean, how the heck did they think that was a good idea? I can think of 10 things right now that should never become reality. Anyways, using the aforementioned thought-to-form machine, they try to create a being called Superman, who would be capable of doing amazing things and who could save worlds. But when they are forced to sell their idea to Overcorp, they decide to rebrand and end up creating a monstrosity. Superman, the Last Night of Tomorrow, or Super Doom. With a corporate-fueled agenda of destroying all competition, Super Doom quickly becomes the strongest super being on its own planet, and then enters the bleed space to murder all other versions of Superman. Of course, bad guys never win forever, so after defeating and devouring multiple different Supermen of multiple different Earths, he was stopped by the Superman and Lex Luthor of Earth-22, who stranded him between universes. He's since been used in a few other storylines and remains one of the most formidable evil versions of Superman to this day. I mean, he didn't even die. Number 2. Bizarro. When Lex Luthor gets the plans for a device called the Duplicator Ray, he modifies the device and uses it to try and create a clone of Superman, who will follow his every order without question. But since our Lex can't seem to do anything right, the resulting doppelganger is an unintelligent, unpredictable, backwards version of Superman, eventually known as Bizarro. Bizarro is a main villain for Superman, appearing in many stories, and I'm so glad because, gosh, he's just so fun to see! Eventually, Bizarro gets a case of the blues and longs for love, and gets the hots for Lois Lane. Lois isn't really interested, but being the great gal that she is, she uses the Duplicator Ray on herself, creating a Bizarro Lois Lane. and the two eventually leave Earth to settle another Earth-like planet they fittingly name Bizarro World, or, and forgive me here, Hetre, which is Earth backwards, which they populate with more and more duplicates of themselves. But don't worry! They have pretty rock necklaces that say Bizarro and Bizarro Lowest 1, so we don't get confused. Number 1. Ultraman. In the universe of Earth-3, things are a little turned upside down. Instead of being driven by the morals of good versus evil, the people of this universe are inspired by strength above all else. I can't really relate. Born on a dying Krypton where Kryptonians evolved to be empowered by green kryptonite to a maniacal version of Jor-El aptly named Jor-Il, baby Kal-El is jettisoned off to Earth. But instead of the classic morals, he's instead inspired by his father to become the strongest possible being with absolutely no weaknesses in himself and the others around him. When Kal lands on the farm of Johnny and Martha Kent, he uses pieces of green kryptonite to empower himself and forces the dysfunctional couple to be his parents until the totally mature age of 7, when he murders them both and sets the farm ablaze. Eventually, this self-proclaimed Ultraman murders the President of the United States of America and takes control of the world, creating the crime syndicate of America with other evil alternate versions of classic characters, including an evil Wonder Woman, Superwoman, and evil version of Batman, Owlman, who have a pretty toxic love triangle.
At number 10, we have Vampire Ultraman. This is a double alternate of Superman because he's already Ultraman, who's considered to be a dark, evil version of the hero we all know and love, but after Batman turns Ultraman into a vampire, the character just delves that much deeper into the uncanny. As if a Superman alternative gone bad isn't enough to handle on its own, this guy has a thirst for blood and takes every chance he can get to recruit more superpowered beings into his Justice League of Vampires. This is a perfect example of how messy, but also really fun, things can get when the multiverse gets involved. I think it's fair to say that Earth-43 is not a place I'd like to visit anytime soon. Okay, at number 9, we have Parallax Superman. Parallax is an evil entity that lives in the Yellow Lantern's central power battery, and he is described as the living embodiment of fear. Basically, this insect-like creature is something of a parasite that takes over a number of hosts throughout various storylines in the comics. One of those times, he takes over Superman, and the combination of these two beings naturally creates a very evil and powerful monster. And what makes it even crazier is that the origin of Parallax Superman came about by Superman's own will. In defense of a group of helpless schoolchildren, classic, Superman decides to give in to the evil parasite and allow it to steal his essence. The only way Superman is able to yield Parallax from his body is by shedding all his fears and, using Thal Sinestro's ring, capturing and banishing Parallax forever. Phew. At number 8, we've got Vampire Superman from World's Finest, issue number 249. This version of the hero only appears for a short time in this one issue when Batman and Phantom Stranger are out at sea on a ship with a small crew. What appears to be going on is a Vampire Superman trying to turn the crewmates into fellow vampires themselves. So when Batman shines a light on Vampire Superman, sending him inside and into a coma. I don't really get why this happens, but basically Batman then attempts to drive a stake into Superman's heart, as one does if they're trying to kill a vampire. But Phantom Stranger stops him and turns the stake on the crewmates, who he reveals as being the real culprits. And for some strange, complicated reason, Superman then comes to and the crewmates are defeated and turned to coral? I don't know. This story was hard to follow, but for a time there, Superman fell victim to vampirism. And this is a scary moment because besides kryptonite, many people aren't aware that another of his weaknesses is magical enchantment, including vampirism and werewolfism. Is that the right term? Werewolfism? Okay, at number 7, Feral Man of Steel. This isn't really a version of Superman that is fundamentally changed into a monster. He's still a man, and he's still Superman, except he's been raised by a pack of wolves in the jungle. In Superman Annual number 6, a DC Comics Elseworld special tells the story of Kal-El, it's spelled K-L-L this time, a version of Kal-El where his ship actually crashes deep in the Indian jungle. There he's adopted by Mirar. It's just M, R, and R. Basically, she's a she-wolf and she raises Superman as one of her own. But of course, this leaves this version of Superman as a silent type. a wolfman who is on the verge of being entirely feral. However, deep down, the good values of the Superman we all know are demonstrated when he actually spares the life of an adventurer who kills his wolf mother and one of her cubs. Basically, feral Superman is integrated into human civilization and given the name of Clark, continuing on as a version of Superman closer to the one we're used to. At number 6, we've got Werewolf Superman. In Superman Volume 1, Issue 422, we see a cover that makes us jump for a second, thinking that our beloved Clark Kent has been overtaken by a werewolf curse. But no, this isn't actually Superman turned werewolf. What it is, though, is a werewolf who takes Superman's costume off of him and wears it. He wears it around for a while. So, for a moment, we get a pretty crazy visual of a drooling, feral wolfman wearing the Superman suit. And we're also left with another visual of a totally naked Clark Kent lying defeated on the floor, but that's neither here nor there. What's crazy about this encounter is that this werewolf actually takes out Superman, knocking him down for long enough that he's actually able to steal the costume, forcing Superman to throw on a pretty sweet one-piece tracksuit and fly somewhere that he can properly change back into his Clark clothes. Later, he finds the culprits of the werewolf serum and then takes them all out naturally, without getting bitten himself, luckily. At number 5, we've got Bizarro. The first time the world sees Bizarro is in Superboy issue number 68 in October 1958. Bizarro is created when Superman is hit with a duplicate ray, and what is left is a gray-skinned, opposite version of Superman. Originally from Earth-3, that's Earth backwards, yes, Bizarro and other subsequent hero opposites are under the impression that good deeds are actually against the law. But in a newer interpretation of Bizarro, he's not much of a threat to Superman, or anyone else for that matter. In the 2017 publication, he's known as sort of a goofy monstrosity that even Clark Kent isn't concerned about. The S on his chest is backwards, he has a little chupacabra as a pet named Colin, and he has horrendous grammar. If you tell him to go right, he'll go lefty ways, and if you ask him to stop, he'll go start. Basically, everyone around him sees him as a big handful and not much more, which is good, because he's still a powerful being from another planet. At number 4 is the Superman Monster. This is a classic mashup story, basically marrying Superman and Frankenstein into one. A guy named Victor Luther comes across an alien spacecraft with the remains of a baby boy within it. When he realizes that the child was supposed to have arrived intact, he devises a plan to revive the being using the body parts of dead bodies found in a local graveyard. Using the advanced alien technology from the ship, Luther creates a revival matrix and brings this monstrous version of Superman to life. But just like the classic story goes, the resulting creature doesn't quite turn out the way that Luther had planned. He's a little grayer and more decayed than he'd like, so Luther rejects him, and gets pretty badly injured in the process. The rest of the story is basically more parallels to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so if you're interested in hearing about the story of Superman and Frankenstein mashed together, go check out the story. It's a one-off, so it probably wouldn't take very long to read. At number 3, we have Super Demon, or Etrigan. This demonic version of the Man of Steel is known as one of the many Supermen of the Dark Multiverse. His origin begins when he's rocketed to an Earth of eternal twilight from a dark planet called Camelot. Luckily, this thing still fights against evil despite his monstrous appearance. At one point, he faces off against Vampire Ultraman, who I previously mentioned on the list, and he's eventually targeted by Prophecy, who wants to steal Etrigan's powers from him. But he's able to escape with the help of Justice Incarnate and goes off to try and free the other Supermen in the Dark Multiverse. This guy has basically every power that Superman has except augmented just a little bit, and often calling on fire as the element of choice. He's got fire breath, hellfire vision, and when he recites a magical verse, is able to unleash what is only described as a burst of hellfire upon his enemies. At number 2 is Sand Superman. This entity is neither human or Kryptonian alien, but a mixture of energy from Quarm, sand from Earth, and some of Superman's powers that have been siphoned out of him. This creation is not quite a monster, but it is an uncanny recreation of the hero that honestly kind of creeps me out. Almost as much as a zombie or vampire version of Superman might. It doesn't have any soul inside of it, and for a time is set on draining even more of Superman's powers from him. Although it does come around and start to act more like Superman does, acting as a selfless superhero, fighting crime, and all that. It still poses a threat to Superman, and the rest of the world for that matter, because due to this creature being composed of alternately charged atoms to Superman, and only gains power when Superman loses it, and vice versa, It's known that if Sand Superman comes in contact with real Superman, there would be a devastating explosion powerful enough to destroy the planet. So yeah, Sand Superman, not to be messed with. And kinda creepy, honestly. Okay, we're at number 1, and I have to put Blackest Night Superman here. 2 words, Zombie Superman. This version of Superman comes back from the dead and terrorizes Smallville with the added powers of a Black Lantern. In the comics, he's able to read people's fear and their power levels with what seems like a built-in HUD system. He's just a predator in all senses of the word. But when they face off, Zombie Superman is able to see more human emotions in Superman than he had in the people of Smallville. Fear, love, hope, will, and on top of it all, this zombie Superman uses Superman's own mother against him, putting her life in peril, and even Clark's dog, which is where I personally draw the line. Thank God he and Superboy put an end to this undead nightmare at the end of the series. The pup also gets some blows in, which is a great little touch.
Number 10, Red Sun Superman. Instead of landing in America, Red Sun Superman landed in the Soviet Union, and that allowed the Soviets to weaponize him instead of allowing Clark Kent to live the normal life he traditionally has. He received severe training that not even the original Superman underwent, as Red Sun Superman was always meant to become a weapon. This allowed him to become quite strong as he paired his severe training with his new communist sense of duty. If the training he underwent wasn't enough to prove his power though, Superman advanced the Soviet Union to almost worldwide control without resorting to war, and he virtually eliminated poverty and disease. This powerful version of Superman is a much more skilled Superman, as that's what he was raised to be, but it was his ability to eventually realize the fault in his own actions and allow the world to become a utopia that kind of puts him a cut above. I don't want to give much of this story away, but if you haven't read it, man, the ending, it'll just kind of knock your socks off. You should definitely read it. Number 9, Ultraman. Who would have thought that a Superman who is just a giant man baby would be one of the more powerful versions of the character? Anyone who has read the Crime Syndicate or Forever Evil stories would probably know this. Ultraman is the Superman of Earth-3, where strength and power are held above everything else. Because of this, the moral ideals that normally hold back Superman are completely gone for Ultraman. Like all evil Superman, he does not hold back at all. But unlike most other Supermen, Ultraman's relationship with Kryptonite is quite different. Instead of weakening the Kryptonian, Kryptonite gives him a crazy significant boost to his power when he crushes it up and inhales it. It's actually kind of terrifying, to be completely honest. Fortunately though, for the heroes of the world, he is depowered by the sun, which caused him to move the moon to block it out when he and the Crime Syndicate of America invaded the Prime DC continuity. Number 8, Calvin Ellis. Instead of Kal-El landing on a farm in Kansas, a black Kryptonian named Calvin Ellis was sent to Earth to escape his planet's destruction. Nevertheless, he didn't grow up trying to fit into society, as he instead became very ambitious. What do I mean? Well, Calvin Ellis worked hard enough to eventually become the President of the United States, giving him a position that allowed him to better protect his world both politically and physically. He still carried his role of Superman and even became a multiversal hero when he teamed up with the other versions of the character during the Infinite Frontier era. Kind of like Red Sun Superman, Calvin Ellis gained political power as well as his own incredible abilities, not to mention that he reprogrammed the alien intelligence Brainiac to help him in his duties. He's also a talented boxer, so there's that. Number 7, Electric Superman. During the 90s, to make Superman more interesting, I guess, DC decided that instead of his normal powers, they would give him Superman energy-based abilities. It instantly makes me wonder who would win in a fight between classic Supes or this guy. This Superman needed to wear a containment suit that helped him regulate his new powers. He could turn back into Clark Kent at will, but at the cost of losing the ability to actually use these new powers. This version of Superman also didn't have the traditional super strength that we'd expect. Instead, he could use energy fields to lift incredibly heavy objects, which is kind of the same as the regular Superman, but wait, there's also more. He could also split his body into two so that he could perform perform different tasks, he could teleport, manipulate energy, he had molecular control, and even more. But then, just as a little bit of icing on the cake, he's also immune to kryptonite attacks and red solar energy, which is a big boon for any alternate Superman. Number 6. Val-Zod. Val-Zod is sort of like the third Superman of Earth-2. He was also saved from Krypton's destruction, and after the passing of Kal-El during an invasion of Darkseid, it seemed that Kal came back, stronger and unimpeded by morals, now serving Darkseid under the name Brutal. Turns out though that this was actually just a clone created by Darkseid, and he was eventually defeated by Val-Zod. That's probably largely to do with the fact that Val here is a man who values intelligence over strength. He has a wealth of knowledge gained through years of Kryptonian study and is possibly smarter than all humans. Val-Zod is stronger because he knows how to use the energy fields that are powered by the yellow sun. In that regard, he was powerful enough to defeat Brutal, who was said to be stronger than the original Superman himself. Number 5. All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman is actually a 12-issue series that sets itself apart from the rest of the DC universe by sort of being a standalone story. At the beginning of the tale, Superman saves an exploration mission to the sun that was sabotaged by Lex Luthor. But because of his overexposure to the yellow sun, he ends up developing new abilities such as the power to harness his bioelectric aura and pushing his normal abilities to unimaginable levels. But it wasn't just his powers that got a boost. His intellect, creativity, imagination, and curiosity also got boosted up to the point that he started getting new skills and trying out new experiments, even some that would allow a successor for himself to be created. That's important because while his abilities and mental acuity had been boosted up and he even became immune to green kryptonite, the overexposure to the sun also meant that he was starting to slowly pass away as his cells became overloaded, causing this story to get really damn emotional. Number 4. Strange Visitor Superman. Okay, before we start, technically this Superman is not canon, but he is truly one of the more powerful versions of the character. In his story, Superman outlives everything in the universe, living for literally billions and billions of years. He lives so long and gets so powerful that he gains new abilities like being able to split himself into thousands of copies that allow the hero to do what he does best throughout the universe. He outlives all the gods, cosmic entities, mortals, angels, demons, and everything. He watches countless civilizations rise and fall and learns an insane amount of skills like telepathy. He absorbs ridiculous amounts of energy, learns magic and strange sciences through all his copies, and then reabsorbs them at the end of everything. He can fly faster than the entropic waves of the end of the universe and can even manipulate the fabric of reality through sheer strength. Number 3. Quantum Superman. Alan Adam is Captain Atom, or the Quantic Superman of Earth-4. He's basically a fusion of Dr. Manhattan and Superman. Sort of. Adam obtained his powers when he was present at an experimental uranium engine that was being tested, which then exploded, turning him into a disembodied mind with no natural division in his perception of time, meaning he perceives the past and the future as a single entity. He has some insane abilities. He has the ability to change his own size, levitate, and telekinetically restructure matter, which he used to construct himself a new physical body after his original body was destroyed. Using quantum superposition, he is able to generate copies of himself. He's able to perceive and manipulate reality on at least an 8th dimensional level, and also possesses quantum sense, making him capable of knowing potentially everything. He is also responsible for merging the minds of both Superman and Ultraman in order to operate the next spot on this list. Number 2. Cosmic Armor Superman. Cosmic Armor Superman is basically a thought robot that eventually became one of the strongest versions of Superman, even though it might be one of the weirdest ones of all time, and depending on your viewpoint, you may not count him as a version of Superman at all. I respect that viewpoint, but he always comes up when people talk about the strongest versions of Superman, so here he is. This creature is somewhat strange in the sense that it isn't quite human, but it isn't quite artificial as well. The thought robot was created so that Superman and the antimatter universe Ultraman together could battle something stronger than they could ever normally face on their own. After the battle was done, the thought robot eventually merged with the entire universe's consciousness, but let me just list the powers that he has here. His powers include reactive evolution, quantum manipulation, plot manipulation, energy manipulation, reality warping, space and time manipulation, immortality, matter manipulation, fourth wall awareness, and a bunch of powers that we can't even imagine. And number 1, Superman Prime. Superman Prime, or Superman 1 million, debuted during the DC 1 million event. This version of Superman stuck around Earth till the end of the 21st century, but after all of those he grew to love passed away, he handed off the Superman mantle to his successor and then went off into space from the 22nd century all the way to the 700th century. He gained godlike abilities and could even bestow his power on others, which he did when he returned to Earth and his descendants. But this guy also spent 15,000 years inside the sun and was drenched in its yellow radiation to become an even stronger version than he already was. He essentially became a god in his own right due to the fact that his exposure to the sun for thousands of years allowed him to increase his powers exponentially. Superman Prime became faster and stronger than any of his other versions, and his powers were increased to unthinkable levels.